introduction. I'm really happy to be here for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's because this is the place where I began research for this book a very long time ago when I was a postdoc at UW in 2009. At which time I had no idea what I was getting into. I knew just a few names. Two of those names are here. So I want to thank University of Washington and for being here today. Two of the real pioneers in revealing the history of Soviet illegal land, people that I got to know really well over the course of doing this research, and who have special acknowledgement in this book. So I'm really glad that they're here. So delighted to be at the University of Washington once again to talk about my book, Leviathan: The Secret History of Soviet Whaling. Today I want to focus in on what was one of my favorite parts of writing the book, and one of the parts which I think maybe unfortunately has some added salience this year of 2025, which is the plight of scientists working under repressive political regimes, and what things they were not able to say and were not able to do. I'm not trying any direct comparisons with the Soviet Union, but to say that you might, history does rhyme sometimes as historians. So forgive me at the outset, I'm a historian, of course, not a marine biologist, but one finds the work that marine biologists, especially whale scientists, do to be extremely fascinating and extremely important in the history of our relationship with the natural world and especially with the ocean. Okay, so this is a picture which was, for most people around the world, their introduction to Soviet whaling. Recognize it. This was Greenpeace's picture of their protest of the Soviet whaling vessel, the Vostok, in June of 1975. Greenpeace protesters managed to locate it in the North Pacific Ocean off the coast of California, and then they filmed its whaling operations. They were taking sperm whales there and dramatically had a picture of a harpoon being fired over their heads. This was broadcast around the world, and people, I think for the first time, most people understood that Russians were doing whaling, and instantly agreed that, this was something absolutely horrible that needed to be ended. In some ways, this was one of the key moments in the Save the Whales movement, one of the key moments towards the moratorium, which would take place would be agreed on less than 10 years after this moment. When I wrote this book, though, I thought, this story that I knew, it happened the year that I was born, was really famous here in the West Coast. I was really interested, though, in who were these people on this boat? Who were these Russians killing the sperm whales of the North Pacific Ocean? And as I got deeper and deeper into this research, I found them more and more fascinating. Amongst those people here on the boat was one of the premier whaling biologists of the 1970s, Alfred Berzin, specialist in sperm whales. And the people on this boat, though depicted here as sort of unthinking mechanical monsters, that's actually the word that Bob Hunter used for them in his account of this encounter, were much more complicated, you won't be surprised to hear, and their ideas about whales were actually not as far from Greenpeace's as one might have suspected. And whale scientists, again, have played a really important role, actually bringing a transformation in the Russian public's ideas of whales. Okay, I don't want to exaggerate it. There'll be, well, I'll try to flesh these ideas out in the course of this talk. To do that, as a historian, go back before the Russian culture, which probably took place in 1917, created the world's first communist state. But of course, it didn't undo decades, centuries of Russian history. There was a long tradition in Russia, especially in the last 50 or 60 years of the 19th century, of doing pretty sophisticated and interesting biology. And I'll just pinpoint a couple of ideas which were really important in Russian science. The study of ethology, the study of animal behavior, was quite well developed in Russia. Maybe the most famous scientist in this regard was a man named Fyodor Kropotkin, who was a socialist and revolutionary, and also put forward a kind of contending theory to natural selection, which stressed the cooperative aspects between species. We thought that altruism was an important motor for evolution just as much as competition was. And Kropotkin was well known for these ideas. And they would, by the way, be warmly embraced by the new Soviet Union, which was, of course, trying to create a new society in which cooperation, not just competition, would play a very important role. And so what I'm trying to say, some of these pre-revolutionary ideas would find their way into the new Soviet Union. Community biology. Russians were very much at the forefront of the study of ecosystems. This is ekosistema biocenos, an idea called biocenosis, which was pioneered by a Russian-Ukrainian biologist, Vladimir Stanchinsky. One of his research sites was one of the first in Ukraine today to really study the movement of energy through ecosystems, to try to quantify it, to try to understand how it passes through ecosystems. And again, this was an idea which the new communist regime fully embraced, the idea that we need to understand ecosystem energetics, in part to plan rationally for our economic future. The state was taking over the entire idea of the Russian economy, and they would need to be able to plan it, and indeed have the opportunity to plan in a new way that capitalists never were able to do, with a central organizing body to organize the economy. If they understood, Lenin was on board with this, Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution, the idea that to plan effectively for the future, we need to know how much energy is available, and we need to know how to wisely use that kind of energy. And this is the concept of wise use. I put up one example of pre-revolutionary traditions which made it past the revolution, and this is the idea of a zapovednik, that is a place that's put aside. It was a kind of Russian form of a nature preserve. And the idea of the nature preserve in Russia was precisely to maintain some places pristine, free from human interaction, so that things like energy transfer could be studied, and ecosystems untouched by humans could be understood. And I put this one up there in particular. It's an absolutely beautiful part of the Russian Far East. It's on the peninsula of Kamchatka, the Kranotsky zapovednik. And also it was created in 1934. This was during Stalin's second five-year plan, when the Soviet Union was rapidly industrializing itself. It was also right in the middle of the creation of the first Russian whaling fleet. Another sign that some of these ideas persisted, made it into the Soviet Union. And in fact, zapovedniki continued to grow in the early years, at least, of the Soviet Union. Okay, this one, as I said, is very near to where much of the whaling took place in the 1930s. Of course, there were some countervailing innovations in Soviet science. Certainly, the Bolsheviks, the communists, believed not just in leaving nature alone. They intended to harness it to the maximum for human use. And they did create right away different bodies of scientific research that would be put to these sorts of uses. I just show you one here. This is the Pacific Ocean Institute of Fisheries and Oceanography. That's in the city of Vladivostok, which was on the Russian Pacific, and one of the most important centers of whaling research as well. So this was an institution designed very much for instrumentalist purposes. How do we increase catches of fish in the ocean? Well, of course, keeping in mind, at least in theory, some of these older ideas of wise use moderation that I'm talking about. And to give a kind of a nod to the persistence of these ideas, this is the Academy of Sciences in Moscow, this kind of futuristic looking building that you see from many parts of the city today. Lived in Moscow for a couple of years, and it's a landmark, a blight, I guess, depending on your perspective, but certainly a center of a kind of a much more holistic way of thinking about the natural world, far less interested in applied sciences, far more interested in the kind of study of ecosystems and things like that. And the Academy of Sciences played an important role here as well. Okay, so how does this connect? Wait. Well, in 1932, the Soviets founded their first whaling fleet. This is so-called Allied fleet, and it was to be based in Vladivostok, the most important city on the Russian Pacific. There's a fabulous account of the voyage. They took the ships all the way from Leningrad, St. Petersburg now, to Vladivostok, nearly the entire way around the world. This is the book. It was written by Russia's first Cetologist, a man named B.A. Zinkovich. Tempted to tell you some stories from that voyage, because there were some great ones. Amongst them, the delicious fact that the very first Russian Soviet whaling kill took place on October 27, 1932, off the coast of Mexico, which was the 15th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. Exactly that day, it had to happen. I don't know how this, if this actually did happen, but that's the way it was reported, at least. And Zinkovich, I don't have a picture of him, unfortunately. I have a picture of a later Soviet whale flying. Instead of giving the kind of research that was being done, Zinkovich did the first Russian really trained in whale science using staff. The Soviet Union was finally founding its own whaling industry. Whaling was not new to the North Pacific. In fact, people in Russia were keenly aware that there had been lots of whaling done in the water, not by Russians, mostly by Americans. In the 70s, 80s, 80s, when they wiped out many of the most of the right whales, bowheads, etc., gray whales off the coast there. And this kind of legacy was bitterly resented in the Russian Far East. It was a symbol of the kind of ecological mayhem and recklessness that Americans were capable of. And Zinkovich felt that the Soviet Union was going to do a much, much better job than the Americans had done, and he was part of that process. He was there to make sure, first of all, that yes, this new fleet was going to catch enough whales to make it to contribute the Stalin's fighter for the feeding of Russian people in the Russian Far East and for the industrialization of the country, but also that when these limits, like Stanishinsky had been talking about, were reached, that the fleet would pull back on its catching. And this is the kind of science that Zinkovich was doing. He was on board, he was examining whale corpses, he was measuring them, he was talking about the number of fetuses that he was finding. He was also educating people on board. This was one of the ideals of the Soviet Union, that everybody should be an expert, not just the experts, but that actually average ordinary workers should know everything about whales as well. Zinkovich talks about staying late at night in the frankly really impoverished, miserable conditions on board the Allied. There were rats and cockroaches everywhere, and staying up very late at night in the cold, giving lectures on the history of whaling, whale biology, etc. He was very interested workers of the Russian Far East. Now, in some ways, right, he was there, as I said, to be a kind of economic advisor, helping locate where the migratory paths of whales were along the coast. And of course, by necessity, he was also just a keen observer of whales. These are some of the drawings from his book, Around the World for Whales. You see gray whales over here and sperm whales over there. The Elliott was catching both species. And Zinkovich, Zinkovich had much more than a purely instrumentalist view of these whales. He often was actually quite touched by what he saw. He described many things like this: a calf lightly wounded on its caudal peduncle, and its mother made no attempt to attack the whaleboat. She just let herself die, as she would not leave her calf, but literally clung to it. We killed her from a very short distance with 2 shots. She made no defensive attempts, not even wounded. This kind of picture of, whales suffering as they were killed, of whales coming to each other's aid, not just mother whales, but we felt like humpback male would come to the assistance of a female humpback. Right or wrong, that's what he was perceiving. So even though he was there as really a fisheries biologist, he became pretty deeply immersed in the kind of ethology of these animals at the same time. And in 1937, when he noticed that the sizes of gray whales were becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, he counseled the directors of the Allied fleet to stop paying bonuses to those gunners who shot gray whales. And they actually went through with this, and they stopped catching gray whales for a number of years. In fact, gray whale numbers were declining precipitously at that time, in part because of hunting in other parts of the North Pacific, and would shortly be protected by international regulation. So in some ways, Zinkovich fulfilled the ideas that Soviet whale science were supposed to fulfill. He helped with catches, but also helped give some kind of caution when the catches, when the system was seemingly coming under stress. All right, I want to talk about one more whale biologist from this time period, and just say that this interest in animal altruism, which that came from a pre-revolutionary tradition, certainly continues. We see it in the work of Zinkovich. He was interested in the way one whale might sacrifice itself for another. Also interested in things like play, and no one, there were studies done on captive dolphins a little bit later, which emphasized these points, and no one really epitomized these kinds of ideas better than a friend of Zinkovich's, a man by the name of Aviner Grigorievich Tamilin, who would certainly be the longest lasting Soviet cetologist, and had a pretty interesting career arc. I'll start you with him in the 1930s. He sailed on the Allied as well. He was very interested to try to understand why, when they harpooned one sperm whale, and the whole herd of sperm whales that they hadn't seen would come seemingly to its aid from very far away. And thought, okay, there must be these whales clearly communicating in some way under the ocean. Tamilin in 1937 moved to the Black Sea, European part of Russia, where he was studying what was then a relatively small dolphin hunting industry. And what Tamilin noticed was interesting, if something horrible, which is that as they rounded up schools of dolphins, they net schools of dolphins, he would watch them closely. And what he noticed was that dolphins, especially mother and calf pairs, seemed to be able to find each other. If, say, a calf was inside a stand, and imagine just like a churning, frantic pod of dolphins, about to be killed. Just total chaos. The mother somehow would be able to find its calf inside these nets. And Tamilin hypothesized that there must be some kind of distinctive sound that each dolphin is making to allow these kinds of associations to be made. Something that another scientists would later talk about in terms of signature whistles amongst dolphins. Tamilin, one of the first really in the world to pay attention to these kinds of dolphin communication systems, of course, under pretty horrible circumstances, it must be said. And one thing I find really interesting, you know, if you're interested in the history of this kind of turn towards the idea of saving whales, whale communication, whale sounds have always played a big role. When you think of Roger Payne's recording humpback song, and when people heard whales, when they understood that dolphins can communicate in sophisticated ways with each other, that was one of the things where people really rethought the idea of killing these animals, for some people this became absolutely abhorrent. Not for Tamilin. Actually, Tamilin had an opposite idea. Tamilin thought, no, given what I understand about cetacean communication, wouldn't it be cool if we could imitate their sounds and just call them to the catcher boat and then just kill them much more easily this way? And that's what he said. If we imitate the signals which elicit responses from this or that species of dolphins or are made by wounded whales, clear that these sounds can attract corresponding animals towards the hunting boats. Oh, now this is the way to whale. Forget chasing them, just call them to the boat. It never really worked out for the Soviets, but it is an interesting moment. Clearly, the kind of context in which one is exposed to whale sounds makes a very big difference in how you might think about them, and Tamilin thought about them very differently. I'll come back to Tamilin because I think he's an interesting guy. By the way, he would to train dogs to run in Nazi paint and flood ordinances underneath them to protect Moscow. So he had a real facility with animal communication, which he used throughout his career. Okay, so I've been talking a little bit about training, etc. Well, that's turbulent, be characterized by many revolutions, and one of those hit the Soviet fleet in 1937 and 1938. That was what historians think of as Stalin's Great Purges, in which Joseph Stalin, who comes to power in the late 20s, purged the Soviet Union, mostly old revolutionaries. Over 1 million people were killed, most people in the Communist Party. And that hit the whaling fleet in 1938. In fact, it hit that part of Russia, the Pacific side, very far away from Moscow, particularly hard by per capita. More people died there than anywhere else in the Soviet Union in these years. And this was the captain of the Allied man by the name of Dudnik. He was thrown, so because it was just about to sail in 1938, KGB officers showed up, and KGB then and arrested him, said you've been sabotaging Soviet whaling effort, you've been deliberately catching too few whales so that you can sell the fleet to the Japanese, our future enemies, and destroy the Soviet Union from within. This was kind of crazy accusations which were going everywhere in the Soviet Union at the time. That's his son over there, by the way. And Dudnik survived amazingly. He was in prison for a few years. He had one other child who died while he was in prison, but he did come back. But many people on the Allies did not. And it was in part precisely because they had stopped catching these gray whales that they had come under suspicion that the catches were not growing quickly enough. This was obviously a blow towards the ideas that you could follow the scientific ideas that were dear to many Russian scientists. All right, I'm going to skip past World War II and talk about what for most people in the Soviet Union, most scientists in the Soviet Union, was really one of the most difficult moments. It's connected to the Second World War and has a lot of connections to the whaling industry as well. And that was the appointment of this man, geneticist, scientist, Dr. Lysenko, to the director of the Institute of Genetics of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. And Lysenko was appointed personally by Joseph Stalin to head what Stalin envisioned as what he called the great transformation of nature. It was these grandiose plans that emerged in the wake of the Second World War to really remake the entire Russian ecosystem. In many ways that we might see as, and some I've written a book about this, as sort of progressive environmentally. The idea of reforesting or maybe forcing for the first time, a really dry Russian steppe in order to increase agricultural production, things like that. Stalin thought that we needed dramatically more food production for what was then a very poor, starving Soviet people. And Lysenko was the man who told Stalin what he wanted to hear, which was that nature was really endlessly malleable. And he based this idea on a kind of rehashing, reworking of Lamarckian evolution. Of course, the idea that traits acquired in a lifetime could then be passed on to one's descendants. And this had great appeal for Stalin and others, because it meant that you could, for example, train crops to become drought resistant. Given and also Lysenko believed in the kind of mutualism, the altruism between plants. If you planted certain plants together, they would help each other grow, not compete with each other. And Lysenko was key in planning Stalin's many of his attempts to remake the Soviet Union. A lot of people found Lamarckianism to be insane, right? I mean, fully discredited it, but they had to go along with it. And Lysenko enjoyed that kind of power. The 1940s, especially the late 1940s in the Soviet Union, was really the kind of apogee of Stalin's power, as it was losing his mental facilities at the same time. It was the apogee of sort of terrorized scientists there. It was also the rebirth of and the expansion of the Soviet whaling, namely to the Antarctic, was connected with World War II as well. The Soviets, as the war prize, took over an old Nazi whaler, the Vikinger, which they renamed Slava. Here you see a postcard celebrating the Slava's arrival in the Antarctic, which was the preeminent whaling ground in the world, had been since the 1910s, and the Soviets had not been part of it. Now they were. This allowed them to enter this preeminent whaling ground. They were also, by the way, signatories to the International Whaling Convention in 1946, in which they agreed to abide by certain limits to catches that would take place around the world. Okay, so these two things came together to really shape Soviet whale science in the 1990s. People who worked in these conditions. The first one, fairly obscure Soviet cetologist by the name of Makar Mitrofanovic Slaptsov. Slaptsov, I don't know much about him. He seemed to be a very shy person. His students at least said he was wickedly funny. I don't have much evidence, but apparently he had a kind of subversive streak to him, which I'll show you that indeed he did have at least some subversion in him. He was assigned to one of the whaling stations on the Kuril Islands, which were taken over from Japan after the Second War. The Kurils, by the way, hanging down from Kamchatka back to the northern Japanese Hokkaido. And this is the Podgorny whaling station, which was Japanese, then became Soviet. And Slaptsov studied the mingling of two currents there, the Oyashio and Kuroshio, and clearly just kind of fell in love with this area. He went on in these dry technical treatises. He talked about these amazing zones of fertility where so much plankton, etc., was gathered together, that you had unbelievable explosions of sea life, including large numbers of sperm whales that he was mostly studying, and that his station was catching at the same time. Slaptsov, yeah, so I mean, one of the interesting things that Slaptsov claimed here was that actually the current system was so unpredictable that Stanchinsky's ideas of biocenosis really couldn't apply to the ocean. That oceanography was too complex, or much more complex than terrestrial ecosystems. And there was no real way to plan whaling catches all that carefully as a result. So he cast doubt at the same time that Lysenko was saying, we can do whatever we want with the natural world. Slaptsov was inserting a kind of cautionary note here. Before I talk about another way he did, I just want to, there's a little bit to the side, but I got to tell you about this whaling station here. It was destroyed in the tsunami in 1952. It's very hard to find any information about that tsunami because this was a closed military zone. So it's accumulated all sorts of legends. One of the things I found, most of the workers at this whaling station died in the tsunami. One thing I found was that this photograph claims to be a blue whale that was washed ashore during the tsunami. I don't know, I've studied this picture for a while. It does seem to be sort of maybe destroyed up there, but how did this thing land on the flimsy bit? I just have to wonder that the tsunami picked it up and put it right where it was about to be processed. It's pretty amazing. And this is the only picture I've ever been able to find of the tsunami, which I think happened at night. So I cast some doubts on the historical accuracy of the depiction of this tsunami. The accuracy of historical data is one of the themes going forward here as well. But okay, that's a little bit to the side. I want to tell you about how Cetologists navigate workings of scientific instinct. Well, he wrote this really. And in 48, interesting, he does this stuff in his whale. He talks on and on about how destructive whaling has been where it's going, how whaling stocks in danger. The sequelist note, sad picture of 1,000-year slaughter of whales. I don't think he chose the cover, by the way, of this one, because it doesn't work with his theme. Here's what I found interesting. First of all, he has this passage. He talks about the sequel. People know the sequel. I wrote my first book on the sequel. I perked up when I saw he's written the sequel, and it was amazing. The sequel was sentenced to extinction in 1768 by Siberian and Russian fur traders who used it for food, as they were known for steel. And so you start saying about this, you could not say it in 1948. To say that Russians drove a species to extinction, that was absolutely impossible in the kind of what they call the anti-cosmopolitan campaign. So, I mean, I laughed out loud when I read this. I said, well, the sea cow was killed in the 19th century by Norwegians. How did Norwegians get to the North Sea in the late 18th century? Clearly, he had to write this. I mean, this was just he knew this was, I can only take this as a joke. Because but it gives you a sense of the kind of things that people were forced to do in the Soviet. And this is why I found this so interesting. When he talked about the way the whales were being hunted and overhunted around the world, he deliberately adopted the ideas of Lamarckian evolution to talk about them. As he said, whales are capable of remembering danger. He was trying to think about, why are whales harder and harder to catch in different places? Why are they so skittish? So to speak, possess conditioned reflexes. This was the kind of sequelist catchword, one of those buzzwords, right? Conditioned reflexes. You do something, you act in a certain way. You eat a lot of food because your mother was starving. Things, ideas which, by the way, are sort of we recognize from epigenetics today. Maybe the sequel was completely wrong. But anyway, the experience accumulated through centuries fixes itself into the nervous system of the animals and gets inherited. In other words, what Cetologists was saying, very crafty manner here was that whales are being transformed through human pursuit in a way that's being inherited in their genetics, actually, through this sequelist idea. We are actively transforming the natural world in a way by hunting as well, not necessarily in a good way. So he used these ideas, turning them around for subtly different purposes. And that's something that I saw in another noted was basically Amphibolian times. Claiming most scientists were Amphibolian. Most of them found ways to work. Klima was at least in private, opposed to the idea that most people were opposed to the ideas of the sequel, most scientists were. But Kluma wrote a really interesting article in 52 called On the Locality of Whale Pods. And he made what seems like kind of an obscure argument that doesn't, on the face of it, seem revolutionary, but it was actually quite important at the time when the Soviet Union was expanding its whaling effort. The LU was catching more and more every year. He made the argument that, look, when you destroy a pod of whales somewhere in the world, most of us think it's going to be replenished. Right? You kill all the fin whales in one part of the Antarctic, fin whales will come in other parts of it. Right? What's the big deal? There's more food for other whales. Well, he said, think about it. What does Lysenko teach us? Lysenko teaches us that habits, the things you do all the time in your life, become part of your genetic inheritance. Right? What does this mean? This means that if you're a whale of the Southern Hemisphere, you're genetically bound to the Southern Hemisphere. You can't just cross the equator. Your genetics will tell you the wrong thing to do once you get up there. What are the implications of this? The implications are that actually whale pods are distinct stocks. You can't have one come replenish a stock from somewhere else because it has been modified genetically through it and its companion's behavior. So another example of using these ideas, which you clearly disagree with, to make an argument for restraint, to not overhunt these pods. Okay. Well, Julie knows how the story ends. Maybe people do. One of the things I found very interesting about thinking about Soviet whale science, these fights, which are obviously over, nobody believes that Lysenko doesn't have the power anymore. But they had Soviet scientists were embedded in the state. Their decisions ostensibly really mattered. The conclusions that they came to had the ability to really shape the actions of the Soviet whaling industry and by extension, the world's oceans. Well, that was put to the test. 1956, you probably recognize Nikita Khrushchev. It's what I tell my from Soviet historian politics. Everyone thinks that the 20th Party Congress was famous. 20th time the Communist Party got together and decided the future of the country. It's famous for one reason, because Khrushchev got up and he said, look, Stalin was a bad guy. We need to take a new course. This is this so-called secret speech because it was so, so explosive that they couldn't speak openly about it. So the 20th Party Congress of 56 is famous. I thought that's nonsense. But fine, whatever. It's Stalin, the end of Stalinism. That pales in comparison to Khrushchev's other idea, which he presented the same day, which is that the Soviet Union should build 9 new whaling fleets. And this was at a time when it was 9 that he announced, by the way. I'll put it on 7 in a second. That pales. That is far more important to the future of the world than the end of Stalinism in the Soviet Union. I don't believe that. I do think that's the most important thing that happened at the 20th Party Congress in 1956. Okay, this was the moment for Soviet science to fulfill the dream that its founders had. Right? This is the moment where scientists who were asked, not at the Party Congress, obviously these decisions by it, but were asked, like, what are the stocks of the world's whales? Should we expand our whaling fleet? Well, people did weigh in. They said various things, like Klumov said, this is crazy. This is not going to be profitable from an economic point of view, or from any point of view, really, as Klumov had to say. Zinkovich, you remember who from the Alyut, he survived. He was still working away by this time in Moscow. He said, this can only lead to the total extinction under the existing rules and regulations. It's inevitable if we keep hunting whales and expand our hunting for whales. They will surely go extinct. Or Sleptsov, who said radical measures to conserve the remains of these North Pacific sperm whale stocks should include the total banning of their catches. In other words, there was a pretty clear unanimity from most of the important whale scientists that this was a bad idea, this kind of dramatic expansion that they were then thinking about. I'll just include one more a little earlier because it does express this kind of emotional connection. A graduate student by the name of Salnikov said, the continuation of whaling with such intensity as now could lead in the future to disastrous results, to the failure of whaling altogether. Whales bring humans such great benefits, they deserve for humans to take care of them and protect them for destruction. So science worked. Scientists recognized that certain limits were being reached. By the way, many of the other whalers around the world recognized the same thing. They were selling their whaling fleets off by the late 1950s and getting out of whaling because it was no longer profitable. Okay, so it worked and it didn't work. Right? They built 7 fleets instead of 9, including the 2 largest factory ships ever to hunt whales, the Sovietskaya Ukraina and the Sovietskaya Russia. These are the various whaling fleets which were built by the Soviet Union. So what did they do? Well, one of the things basically different marks for to figure out where they migrated to. Like, as soon as I mark one, it's caught the next day. No data whatsoever. It was totally pointless. We're killing way too many. To the answer that they wanted, right? So we said, okay, this is really bad. But if we're going to expand, go to get away from my amazing zone of fertility. Go build your go search for whales elsewhere, which is exactly what we did. And in that, by the way, in California, eventually some neat Greenpeace. So others pointed to this particularly interesting spot south of Australia and New Zealand, place that the IWC called Area 5, Rayon 5 here in Russian, as a place where it hadn't been hunted that much recently. Stormy weather, but you know, there's promising for still some whale stocks to be found. And this was, as has been really beautifully detailed, especially work, by massive blast gas of Soviet whaling gas. Anyway, 61. This again comes from numbers which Yulia and others have put together. Soviets reported killing 778 humpbacks in that area. They'd killed 11,778. The next year, reported killing 302, and it killed 9,619. In other words, the total abandonment of motivated, shaped whale science, and to some degree, whaling policy as well. 59 to 64, they killed nearly 30,000 humpback while reporting less than 2,000. Here's the illegal catch. This is from Yulia's work here. Illegal catches in the Antarctic. You can see the difference between reported and actual catches. So, you know, an industry which at least to some degree, began on the promise of a kind of new importance for scientists, and would do things differently than had been done in whaling previously, ended up in much the same, even more destructive place in the 1960s. I'll just follow up mentioning a couple of whale scientists who continued to do useful, important work, especially in keeping the statistics that have allowed people to reconstruct what was taking place. This was secret, obviously. This is Dmitry Tormasov. As a young man, that's actually him in Wellington, New Zealand. This is Yuri Mikhailov as an older man. I don't know, maybe one of you two took that photograph. I'm not sure. In a cafe in Odessa, probably. Both of these men, especially Tormasov, kept in his apartment for many years. Later to be revealed to the rest of the world. And then Alexei Yablokov, the tall bearded man here in the middle, is a young student with his mentor, S.D. Kleinenberg over there on the right, who had studied dolphins as well. And Yablokov was kind of the centerpiece of organizing subtly information about Academy of Sciences. I think one of these bastions that really resisted some of the worst instincts of the fisheries institutes. Here's Yablokov as he later became the founding member of Russia's Greenpeace Party and a member of government, not under Gorbachev, but under Yeltsin afterwards. And then I'll just finish with Tamilin, who in 1974 wrote his book In the World of Whales and Dolphins, and it presented a very different outlook. We thought him last we thought he was talking about how we can call dolphins to ourselves in order to kill them, more easily than understanding calls to each other. His book in 74 was a very different kind of book. He called dolphins, humans' best friend. He called for a 50-year moratorium on whale catches in this book. I think it's Pacific Ocean, but very different perspective by 1974. He seeing what was going on and understood that this was sort of become incredibly destructive. And it was books like this, which was really probably the most, my understanding, the most popular book on whales in the Soviet Union. People refer to it as the Bible. Which really impacted public perception as well. Not largely aware of what was going on. And by the time the Vladivostok was confronted by Greenpeace, just a few months after this came, actually much of the Tamil side of this case, John Lilly, the crazy dolphin researcher here in the United States, who really reshaped ideas about dolphins as well. This was beginning to be really the prevailing notion of whales in the Soviet Union, including with people like Alfred Berzin, who was on board there, who was warning needed to stop. In one sense, in an important sense, completely failed to stop when they stopped coming, which was far worse than they would have imagined. In another sense, they kept working, many of them, in their own ways, behind the scenes, subtly changing ideas in Russia about whales in ways that would ultimately, I argue in the book, be important for Russians agreeing to end their whaling industry when the moratorium came into effect in 1987. I'll finish there. And I'll be happy to take questions.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask a question.
Go ahead.
I'll let you pick.
When did the International Whaling Commission come into?
It was founded in 1946. Yeah, so there were organizations more informal with whaling before the Second World War, but 1946, whaling countries got together in Washington D.C. And came up with the which would regulate exporting at least whaling going forward.
It's Doug Chapman, who was
Yeah.
our dean,
Right.
was on the commission, and I can remember the discussions about this is what we reported, but this is what we really think happened.
That's great. You knew Doug, one of the three wise men of the IWC. Yeah. Doing this from whatever this crazy sort of computer modeling here in the basements of the fisheries building, probably. Yeah.
Should at the time we had two faculty members. Bevan was one
Bevan,
of
I was gonna say Bevan was one.
and the other one in a moment, but anyway.
Didn't Bevan marry a Russian woman?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
yeah, so.
I put his archives here, but that's an interesting story. I won't go into the details of that one. Bill. I'm not gonna ask about 49. It's worth noting, if we left on a sort of positive note here about Russian attitudes, it's kind of gone the other way now. They're not in the business of waiting. But there was a lot of resistance. So there was this window of time when Yeltsin was there, when Yablokov came out and not only admitted what the Soviet Union had been doing, but also was willing to officially correct the catch record. You know, I make that an official statement of the Russian government, and there was a statement to that effect, as you know, from that time in 1993, 94. But, you know, with the moving on of the regime, there's been a very different attitude towards it, to the point where they started calling, in the International Whaling Commission, they started calling what Yulia and I and others were doing the alternative catch theory.
Alternative facts.
And I'll just say, I suspect that her photo is in the dartboard somewhere.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Yeah, it's that was a moment in time. And I think historians are just now reckoning with this moment in the 1990s, which for me was so formative in my relationship with Russia. It's when I first started living there, when I first started getting to know people from Russia, and it's over. Clearly over.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I find interesting was with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine now was that the part of the Russian waiting people is in Crimea, and Mykolaiv is Ukrainian. So
Don't tell him that.
No.
so he isn't seen
He's very pro-Russian.
Oh really? Oh, I didn't know that.
He wants them to invade.
Oh wow. Oh. Well, we live and learn.
Yeah. Mikhail was none of these figures, I mean, this goes to the point that, I mean, none of these figures fit probably nicely into our own politics. Mikhail, for example, was a very you guys know him very well. I interviewed him on multiple occasions. He's a, you know, what we would think of as a Russian chauvinist for sure, you know, a great Russian patriot. A man being bombed by, you know, living in Odessa and being bombed. I corresponded with him a bit during the war. And that's what he responded to me with. He said, well, hopefully the Russians will win soon and I'll be free. Also a very brave man in the Soviet Union, being taken and interrogated by the KGB for his continued outcries against the falsification of data, and in part because it's, you know, couldn't publish what he wanted to publish, but also because he genuinely thought it was wrong. At least that's my understanding. Yeah, in the back.
I'm curious, where was the market for oil? You know, is it within the Soviet Union or being sold abroad, or?
Yeah, mostly in the Soviet Union, but although later, so, you know, this I found slightly more difficult to trace in the book. So the first idea was this is going to feed Russians, especially starving Russians in the Russian farms, right? And then I read account after account that people hate it. They didn't like. I may be starving, but I'm not eating whale meat. I sleep good because I've heard it's not that bad. And certainly many people around the world enjoy whale meat, but this is a constant theme in the 20th century. The British started campaigning to get people to start eating whale meat as well, which failed after the Second World War. And it seems to have failed, in part for quality issues. A lot of the whale meat spoil was tainted, so they ended up using it in Russian fries, not primarily food, although they used food. What most whale oil was used for in the 20th century was to transform into edible fats and turned into margarine. So it was fat. It was a butter substitute, and this was particularly important around the world after the Second World War. There was a real and perceived shortage of especially edible fats. And that had been already important in Western Europe in the 20s and 30s. And became very important in the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s. I wasn't able to find the kind of information which I wanted to, which is to read exactly where all the whale products went. Some went through medications, especially from some of the internal organs, but the most was consumed in the form of mud. Yeah.
What were other countries doing in the meantime? So when they saw this huge increase in whaling, well, I suppose it was unreported, so
Yeah.
you know, but was that matched by other whaling countries ramping up efforts at all, or what was going on in other places?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking specifically about the 60s, what we see is a major decline in whaling in Norway and the UK, in particular. It's been two of the most important whaling countries in the world. And they were, in fact, getting rid of the whalers. Japan is a different question. Japan was, I have to look at the statistics and maybe these two didn't fill that in. Japan was not decreasing, they were buying some of these factors from the countries. Japan had a different market, people ate whale meat in Japan, which is quite right to say that this wasn't entirely, so the extent of the Soviet expansion after 56 was not new. Certainly people knew that there were these new factory fleets, they were reporting certain numbers that were larger than the Soviet Union had been catching in the past, but still officially within ever shrinking IWC quotas. It's a very complex situation. So you usually it's a 20% national quota. What's clear is that many people resented the growth of Soviet whaling, wondered how it was being done. Some people suspected, some people knew that there was some cheating going on, though everything I've encountered, no one had any idea of the extent of the cheating that was taking place. But it was a kind of open secret that there was some cheating. But on the other hand, cheating was not entirely new. Other countries had cheated as well, certainly. There's evidence that the Japanese were cheating in ways that people didn't really understand the way to them, not nearly at the same extent, to the same extent. So yeah, people I think it's safe to say we're not happy that the Soviet Union was becoming a major whaling power at the time. But most countries wasn't paying anymore. Wasn't paying business.
One more question? Otherwise, we'll give a big hand to Ryan. Thank you very much.